in snow sports accident reconstruction. I'm sure this episode will be included in my book, Slide Rule Sleuth, when that gets done. Before I get started, though, I just wanted to go through briefly my resume here. I have a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado in Boulder. I was a ski racer there, where I was a three-time All-American and a 1982 giant slalom national champion. I've also got some experience in the winter sports industry with snowboard equipment. I've got several patents on snowboard equipment, which I produced with a company called Airwalk out of Carlsbad, California. That was back in the 90s, and relevant because it shows my background is pretty broad when it comes to understanding skiing and snow sports. I've also actually done a lot of cases involving ski lifts, but these presentations are solely to do with collisions. So this case is a skier collision occurred at Arapahoe Basin. The defendant in this case was a 13-year-old female. She was crossing this trail Humbug. She was 5'4", 130. Her recollection, at least on the witness statement card, was got to middle of run, looked to my right and saw this guy is right on top of me. The plaintiff was a 61-year-old male descending the same trail. He was 5'10", 180. He remembers getting hit, and what's relevant about that is throughout this case, he maintained he could remember nothing, which makes it difficult to support your position unless the evidence supports you. But in this case, didn't look like the evidence supported him. I was working for the 13-year-old girl. So in this case, there was no ski equipment to examine. There were some ski patrol measurements, some ski patrol photos, and we, Compass Consulting Engineers, did a site inspection, although at a later date. So in this case, given the information we had, I had an area of rest, AOR, for the male skier, and I needed to determine an area of impact, and then I could use conservation of momentum to solve for speeds. When you're doing conservation of momentum, if you know the approach angles of the skiers, you know their departure angles and their departure speeds, you can solve for the approach speeds. So this is the from the incident diagram from the ski patrol. This was, as I said, Arapahoe Basin. And these blue squares or blue circles represent locations where photographs were taken. And they were logged on a separate sheet with respect to their distance from the position of rest of the male skier, which is diagrammed here in the lower left. In the upper right, they actually call out GPS coordinates for that position, which is some of the hard data I used here in the momentum, in setting up the relationships for momentum. This is a photograph taken by the ski patrol on the date of the incident, and it shows this is generally the area where the girl was skiing across. She was going up to the east wall access. If you've ever been to Arapahoe Basin, a lot of this is above tree line, so there's no real distinguishing features between trails. Here, there's a ramp that goes uphill. That's where she was going. At the time of the collision, she was following her father, and he had already gone up the ramp, so he didn't see any of the collision. There is a trails merge sign here, which designates trails merge, even though the trails are all above tree line. There's no clear delineation between them. This shows the path of the father who had gone up the ramp already before the collision. And the girl who was following him was somewhere down in here when the collision occurred. This is from her deposition, where she drew on a photograph where she recalls she was crossing and where she was when she looked up and first saw the man, who was right here. Down here is a marker the ski patrol put in for the point of rest of the male skier after he had slid some distance. This is just another view. It's Google Earth Street View. It's obviously a different day and time, but it does show the east wall access ramp and the sign for it. This is an image I pulled from Google Earth. What I did was put in the GPS coordinates for the point of rest of the male skier that was provided by the ski patrol, and this is what I got. The male skier had been descending this trail right here, pretty much straight down by his own testimony. The girl and her father were coming from the trail next to it. And they came down just under where the lettering is, or the numbers are here, and then they were crossing the trail headed out to the east wall. This is an overhead view of those same GPS coordinates. It's not too helpful yet, but it will be. Downhill is in the direction from the bottom of the photograph to the top of the photograph. This is another view of the point of rest of the male skier. This is the trail he was descending from right to left. Over here on the east wall are some shadows created by the posts that I showed you for the signage for the east wall access. This is a view looking down Humbug Ski Trail, which was the descent path for the male skier. He had come down here. The girl had come down off to the left behind this snow fence shown by the dotted lines, and then proceeded along this relatively flat area and was crossing Humbug to go out to the east wall when the collision occurred. This is another view of that. What this shows, and this was not from the date of the accident, but here it shows a rope line dividing the trails. The purpose of that, it's a hazard to mitigate skiers from merging too quickly into trails. So it gives skiers an opportunity to make observations of skiers to the side of them on a quote another trail, even though it's all really the same open area. It prevents people from cutting quickly into trails, but it doesn't force people to look. This is a closer up view of the end of the rope line showing the path of the girl as she entered Humbug and was attempting to cross. This again is the upper east wall gate. This was closed during our inspection as there wasn't a lot of snow that year. This is another view showing the path of the girl in green, path of the man in blue, and the general area where the collision occurred. She would have been crossing and going up to the east wall access. So what I did is took all the information. Here's the point of rest of the male skier. We knew from his testimony that he was coming pretty much down the fall line of this trail. And we know from the girl's testimony, and her father too, who was ahead of her, he didn't see, but he described their path, and they had come in here and they were crossing. So this gives the relative angles of approach of each skier. This is a bit more refined diagram to kind of hone in on what their angles of approach were and departure angles. As I mentioned earlier, if you have angles of approach, angles of departure, and departure speeds, then you can calculate approach speeds. So for him, once we determined the area of impact, and it was done for two situations, one for what the man recollected and one for what the girl recollected. But and they were pretty close to being the same. And for her, she described her post-impact travel is pretty short. I think it was on the order of 30 feet. For him, it was much longer. I don't remember the exact distance, but it was over 200 feet, which supports that he was moving pretty fast when he hit the snow. So what we did is, in this case, we didn't do a Faro scan, LiDAR data for the scene. I did use Google Earth imagery. We had GPS data for the position of rest of the male skier. We had a ski patrol diagram that showed the position of photos. We had ski patrol photos, and we had our own Compass Consulting Engineer inspection photos. So the momentum was done, as I said, momentum analysis was done for two different areas of impact. I'm only going to show one result here, and I won't get into the weeds on it because that's not so important for this. Both of these analyses relied on the GPS determined area of rest for the man. They're both based on the girl skiing generally across the lower part of the trail in the direction of the east wall ramp, and based on the male skier descending humbug along the fall line. Now, in terms of the collision, Newton's third law says for every force, there is an equal and opposite reaction force. So in this case, the male said he was injured. If those injuries were a result of body-to-body contact with the girl, then she would have received forces equal and opposite to the ones that caused injury to the male. She didn't report any injuries at all. So that pretty much discounts that he was injured from the collision, and any injuries he had would have been from either impacting the snow or tumbling along the snow, although there was no report of tumbling. This is a diagram that's a little more refined, showing the angles of approach and departure distances and angles for both the skiers. So point of impact in this case, based on the girl's deposition, was the location of photo 7, which was 50 yards uphill from the area of rest of the male. Now, in doing the analysis, I needed to determine the post-impact velocities of each of these skiers. And so what's important to know is that when somebody's hit, they fall at the rate of gravity, which is 32.2 feet per second squared. But if they're moving horizontally, depending on their speed, they can cover some throw distance with a hang time, and then they'll hit the snow and slide. So I'm working this analysis knowing the full distance and have to figure out how that distance was divided up based on the coefficient of friction, which I have for ski clothing on snow, and also the slope. For a flat surface, the coefficient of friction is the normal force times the cosine of the angle and the coefficient of friction. Cosine of 0 is 1, so that's just your weight times the coefficient. When you're sliding down a slope with some angle, the cosine now starts decreasing from 1 all the way down to 0 at 90 degrees. So the normal force is reduced and the effective coefficient is reduced. So there were some calculations I had to do to determine post-impact velocities for both those skiers. Then I used the momentum spreadsheet. I put in the angles before impact, direction after impact, and their final velocities based on those calculations I just briefly explained. The girl was going about 13.9 when she departed the area of impact based on her total distance to point of rest, and the man was going about 32 miles an hour after the impact. So knowing the angles and the departure speeds and their masses or weights, in this case, it was calculated that the girl was going about 11.5 and the man was going about 35 miles an hour, which isn't unbelievable. There's actually been some studies done by ASTM over several years at multiple ski areas looking at speeds of skiers and snowboarders, males and females on blue square trails, and the average velocity for all of them is 28 miles an hour, which brings me to this. I made a hypothetical calculation, assuming the man was going 28 miles an hour down the trail and he was overtaken and hit from behind by the girl. Given the angles we know they were approaching the area of impact at, for her to be going at least have a component in his direction of travel of 28 miles an hour along her actual path, she would have had to have been going 38 miles an hour, which was probably impossible given the flat nature of the slope where she was traversing. Remember, she was coming across, he was coming down. So based on those velocities, for both those calculations, it's clear the girl wasn't going that fast and the male would have been going fast even if there was no collision and he just fell down and slid. It's clear that he was going pretty fast. So Colorado Ski Safety Act, which really is what all these analyses are concerned with answering questions about, says ski in control so you can stop and avoid other skiers and objects. When skiing downhill, you must yield and avoid those below you. Don't stop where you can't be seen from above. And when entering a trail, look uphill and yield to others already on the trail. Now, this fourth element may have a bearing on things, except sight lines are wide open and the girl didn't just enter the trail, she was crossing the trail for some period of time, probably more than 4 seconds, if I recall. So she was visible. I don't know why the male skier cut it so close. So I determined that it was the fault of the male skier for not looking below him. I mean, she had a right to be crossing the trail, and she didn't enter suddenly from a stopped position. She was visible and on a well-established path across the hill. So according to the Ski Safety Act, the primary duty was on the man to avoid the girl, and he caused the collision by failing to comply with his duty. So this case never went to trial. Shortly before the trial, the male skier decided, I don't know what he decided, but he didn't pursue the case. And so it went away. I don't know if there was a settlement or not, but I'm sure my work in this case for the girl who was the defendant did a lot to dissuade the male from pursuing it. So again, if you want anything, if you'd like to talk about crazy ski cases, or you have your own crazy ski case, look me up.